Hello everyone and welcome back to the 12th episode of the Road to FIDE Master series, in which I will cover the third game of the Chess Eagles Chess Festival, in which I got paired with black pieces against a very talented junior player, Filip Pavlic. I believe he had many successes in his own age group, and we also have a history between us because around 1 year ago we played a classical chess with the same colors and we drew that game. In that game I went for the Slav defense, opponent opted for the exchanged Slav, and as you may know it's very hard to win such positions. So in this game, even though my opponent repeated the d4 move, I decided not to repeat the opening and try to go for something more ambitious. So I opted for the King's Indian defense with the idea that perhaps my opponent will try to go through the fianchetto too, and that's why I like this choice a lot, because actually I quite enjoy playing the kid with this fianchetto when white does that. So my go-to variation is usually knight c6, even though at this point you can also try knight b2 d7 or c6 moves. There are also fine options, and not only that, at this point you can have another option, another choice to make. You can play e5, you can play bishop f5, but I opt for a6. It makes the games imbalanced the most, I would say, and I believe that, and it suits the narrative of this game, in which I wanted, as usual, to win because opponent is much lower rated. My idea is to push b5 obviously, and opponent can try many things. In this game he played b3, and the crucial lines I believe are d5, knight d2, because now my knight seems trapped, so I have to play c5 in order to protect the b4 square, and that's the first line. The other line would be a3, very calmly looking move, but the point is that opponent want to push e4 and not allow my bishop here, and for that reason I have to react in the center with e5, or actually go straight with b5, allowing e5, and then there are plenty funny stuff coming on in the game. However, as I've said, opponent went with b3, allowing me to push my usual plan, which is rook b8, b5 takes, and at this point he went with knight e1. Obviously my knight is under pressure, so I went to a5. It may seem counterintuitive to put the knight on the edge of the board, but the point is that at some point in the game I will try to perhaps push b4 and then c5 and maybe c4, so the knight might be useful for this pawn break, and at that point obviously I'm not worried ever about this knight being stuck or anything, because there is no clear way how to attack it. b4 will not ever work because c4 will be the greatest outpost ever. So with that in mind, we continue the game with e4. Opponent tries to take over the control of the center, very logical. I opted for b4 and bishop a6. I want to activate my bishops in the best possible way, and in here my opponent went with knight c2 move. I don't like it as much. I would say that knight d3 was a better option in terms of the strategy for later stages of the game, mostly due to the fact that it not only controls the c5 square, which might be crucial since I will be trying to push the pawn there, but also maybe opponent can try in the future something on his own, like e5. e5 seems like a natural move in this specific position, maybe a move earlier, maybe a move later. The idea is that it will hit my knight with no clear squares to go to, and not only that, it would open up the bishop, which should be useful. Knight c2 seemed a little bit too passive, also due to the fact that I will be playing knight d7 followed by c5 very quickly, and this knight really does not have anything going on, and is not useless but could have been more active. So because I've pushed c5 and I'm really preparing push c4 with the idea of getting the c4 square for my pieces, a2 weakness to attack and so on, my opponent decided to take the pawn, exchange the bishops and go into such position. At this point I was feeling very well, very great about my situation, because I believed that my opening ideas worked and I have a very pleasant situation. Also I was surprised at this moment because my opponent opted for rook e1. Even though it has some merit to it because it goes away from the pin, I felt like it is misplacing the rook, because as of now I have just two squares, two jumps to get to d3 square, from which I would deliver the fork. So I started with move knight e5, and to my even bigger surprise, my opponent played knight f4 move, and I was like, what's going on? Okay, knight is covering the square, I get it, but what after g5, right? And then I found the tactic that after g5, queen h5 would be the move. Very, very nice move, and with g5, well, my king is not so safe anymore, so I would not want to play that, and for this reason I decided to go calm about the position and simply play e6, with the idea that I will try to develop my queen, my rook, and so on, slowly getting my position to be better and better. Opponent played h4, not sure what's that about, but okay. Queen f6, now hitting the rook that might be vulnerable there on b2. My opponent went with queen c1. I felt like rook b1 would be played, but then perhaps after rook d8, queen c1 we would actually transpose to the game, because in the game queen c1 was played first in order to protect the rook. I took over the d file, and white in the end still went with rook b1, saying that okay, rook will be maybe under pressure there, so let's go back with it. At this point I was not happy with the fact that I am lacking the clear idea of what to do, or rather I should put it this way. I have a clear idea of pushing c4, but there is pressure to b4 pawn, such a good one, that I cannot push it, and if not, what else can I do? Because all the pieces are basically placed in the best possible spots, so what can I do? And I felt like my opponent might have similar problem, meaning that his all pieces are in the squares that they cannot really be better at any other ones. So I felt like, okay, maybe I can make a waiting move. So h5 it is, blocking the h5 possibilities from the opponent if he would like to counterplay in the future. Now this option is gone, and I was waiting for, well, the decision, what opponent will be doing. I was expecting mostly move like rook d1, because it would perhaps be a nice try to exchange some pieces, because with limited space this is usually what we want to do. But then after trade and moves like this, I believe that I would just abandon the idea of playing c4 as of now, and would try to jump to c6 with the a5 knight, taking over the dark squares in the center, still having a very nice situation. However, my opponent went with queen e3, which took me a little bit by surprise. So, c4 was the option still, but I did not like the idea of queen a7. I was not sure what's going on in terms of my pieces. Will I lose one? Will I, still have the control over the queen side or not after all the tactics that are involved here? So I didn't want to risk it, and for that reason I went in deep into the thought process. Thankfully, due to a well-played opening, I had a lot of time relatively, so I could have figured out, what to do. And I spent a lot of time in here, basically calculating till sometimes even pawn endgames. I know it may seem unbelievable to you guys, like what are you talking about, but yeah, this is basically the truth. And what's the variation? Because queen went to e3 and it's not defending the pieces anymore, I felt like bishop d3 is a strong candidate move. First variation that you have to calculate in such instance is queen takes c5, because you are losing a pawn. Queen is protecting the knight, attacking ours, so what's the point? The point is this: knight b7, going away from the attack, attacking the queen itself. Queen does not have too many squares to jump to really on the c file in order to protect the knight. Queen c7 would be the only one, and then I can simply hit it once more, grabbing the knight, claiming the advantage. So this is the first variation. Okay, so let's jump into the other one, right? So whenever the knight is protected somehow, I don't care, I just take it and play c4. That's the idea that I always had in mind. So the only one that really matters is knight takes d3. And let's begin the long variation, okay? I take the knight, he takes the pawn, I hit the rook, with the rook, the knight and the queen. So he has to take my knight for his knight. And at this point I decided that the move f4 will be the most critical one, because it is a forcing move too, right? It makes my knight go away. Not only that, wherever I go, g4 will be the best place surely. e5 is coming, closing the diagonals for my queen, because if not e5, then, queen is going there and there, wherever, so the king will be perhaps gone and lost and stuff like that. So e5 is logical, but then I found this point of queen d8. The idea is this: I am still trying to get to the dark squares, hitting the king from one way or the other, so the queen trade is really unavoidable for the opponent. And if that's the case, well, I can then try to place the rooks on the second file, right? Just one small variation, because it's a long one and a nice one. I will include this in the analysis anyway. So queen a7 would have been nice in order to not only protect the d4 square but also f2 and attack my rook at the same time. So I felt like I might just simply sacrifice the rook on g2, deliver a check here, and then try to simply go for the checkmating patterns. King cannot really go back because of me going there, taking all the pawns, checking, and then once again switching back to the previous situation. And king d2 would be met with rook going to the open file another time and checkmate like this. I calculated all of this while calculating bishop d3, so almost 15 moves ahead, and this is only a sideline because, as I've said, in here queen trade is much more obvious move to be chosen, and the biggest threat would be for the opponent to try to exchange one of my rooks and take control over the d-file, but thankfully it's not working due to the tactical reasons. I can take the rook and then sacrifice on g2, making a fork to the king and the rook, and then slowly getting there in terms of the a2 pawn, and I have a clear knight advantage, winning the game. So this was the most important variation of them all, I believe. Obviously at this point white does not have to play there and lose a piece. They can try, for example, move like bishop f3, or maybe move like bishop e4, but against both moves I would consider placing my rook this one or this one to the third rank, getting this pawn, maybe the other ones, and so on. So once again I felt like I would be winning. So f4 was, let's say, solved until the end, as you saw. The other variation was rook f1, which was also chosen in the game, and I felt like it's not that crucial, it's not that important, because I can simply play what I was planning to do anyway, which is knight g4, hitting the f-pawn. F-pawn cannot ever move anymore because I will transpose my queen to the second rank, so the only way for white really to fight for something was queen g5, and I felt like from the distance, seeing this position, I would be simply playing rook a8, maintaining the control over the second rank, maintaining the initiative, getting back at least one pawn. So when you consider such circumstances, thinking about the position from such moment, you would happily agree that it's a very nice outcome. And for those reasons, after a long calculation, I decided to go with it. So bishop d3 it is, takes, and as we saw this variation already, and we got into such endgame in which obviously white tries to at least exchange one pair of rooks, and we got into such situation. It's obvious that I'm better due to the fact that I have the activity and white has several weaknesses, so hopefully it's not a question of if, but rather when I will win the game. So my opponent decided to transport the bishop to the d1 square in order to protect the b3, but it was a little bit too slow. At this time I opted for also transportation but of the knight to d3 and then c5, hitting both weaknesses, having then an eye to the other one, so amazing spot for the knight to be in. And now opponent played king f3. I felt like it is an inaccuracy, because what is white really trying to achieve here? I would say that the dream scenario for white would be to give away the b3 pawn with simultaneous exchange of the light pieces, going into some rook endgame with 4 pawns against 4 pawns on the king side, and then only one b pawn for myself, because maybe in some circumstances such endgame might be a drawish, let's say. And besides that, there are not so many tricks that white can try to deliver, and for those reasons I would say that move like maybe rook e1 would be a better one, trying to get the grasps of, let's say, all the weaknesses, maybe indeed forcing me to go into this rook endgame, which I was unsure about whether or not it would be winning, but after king f3 I found a very nice way of winning the material in a way that I wanted to do it, which is rook a1, with the idea that as of now rook is pinned to the bishop is pinned to the rook, therefore I am threatening to take on b3 without exchanging the light pieces, which would be my dream scenario. And if that's the case, well, what else can white do? They can either go here or here with the king protecting the rook, but at the same time allowing me to take both pawns, or bishop e2. But after bishop e2 I will just simply take here, and with knight against the bishop I should be winning also. Maybe not that easily because the bishop might be a threat to my pawns, but in the end it should be just a matter of technique. Opponent, however, went with king g2 line, and I cannot be really like, oh, happy, not calculating anything, getting the pawns, because actually white can get some counterplay if I will not play precisely. What is the counterplay? I take one pawn for sure, then I exchange the rooks and I get second pawn, but the trick is this: king e2 with the idea of king d3, king c4, king b4. And even though I've played a very nice game until this point, the move I am about to show you guys is the one that I am the most proud of, because it's not easy to consider, and I also saw this from the distance when deciding how to approach this endgame, how to get all those pawns advantage, because at this point I played knight h7. I know it may seem crazy, where is the knight going? Well, the answer is this: the knight is trying to get to defend the pawn, and in such circumstance it's useful for you guys to try to do reverse engineering, let's say, so think backwards about the variation. So you should not think where the knight has to jump, but you should rather think about, okay, from which square would the knight defend the pawn? And it's clear that d5 would be the best one, right? And then you try to think backwards, like, okay, how to get to d5? Maybe f6. And then h7 actually looks quite natural. But if you go the other way around and you try to answer the question, okay, how can I defend the pawn with the knight? How should I start? Well, there are not always easy answers, because you would perhaps try to look for such moves. Fortunately, in this position, actually the knight cannot go anywhere like that. So knight h7 indeed is a strong candidate move, but sometimes it will not be as strong, but you still have to see it. And the way to do it is to try to think backwards. Hopefully you understand. And how did the game continue? I played knight h7, knight f6, knight d5, just on time to protect everything. And even though the opponent might try to exchange the knight, I am happy with the situation anyway, because thanks to this pawn advantage on the king side, my opponent really cannot take on b4, because then I would be simply too fast to promote, and after him taking on d5, there are many ways to win a game, but I am in no rush really, so I just played simply king g7, king g6, and at that point my opponent finally resigned. The idea is simple: I will try to create a passed pawn on h-file sooner or later, and then with my king perhaps grab all the other white pawns, winning the game effortlessly. So very happy with the game, with the result, the way I've played, and the fact that after those terrible first two games I actually won deservedly and in a clean way, let's say. So hopefully you like it too. Let's look at the review. I hope it will be a nice one. Well, 89? Guys, I'm shocked. I felt like it will be well over 90, so I don't really know like what happened there. But okay, that's chess.com evaluation. I don't agree with it. So like you may comment which game did you like the most, because it seemed like all three games then were in the 80 to 90 segment, but I feel like this was by far the best one. Maybe it's just my subjective opinion, you can tell me yours in the comments, but anyway, thank you all for watching this recap, and with 3 out of 3 we'll get into the round number 4 tomorrow, so stay tuned for it, subscribe to the channel to not miss out on the video, and we'll see each other. Bye bye.